5th of December, 1945, 5 American torpedo bombers took off from a naval air station in Florida on a routine training flight. The weather was fair, the crews were experienced. It was an exercise they had flown many times before. About 90 minutes in the flight, Leader radioed that something was wrong. His compasses, he said, had stopped making sense. He was no longer certain which way was north. Both the sea and the sky, he reported, looked strange and unfamiliar, and he could not find the coastline. Over the next hours, the transmissions grew more confused. The planes turned one way then another, searching for land that never appeared. As night fell and their fuel ran low, the voices faded. Then there was silence. 5 aircraft and 14 men were gone. A large flying boat sent out to search for them vanished as well, taking its own crew of 13. In a single evening, 27 men and 6 aircraft had disappeared over the same stretch of ocean, and almost nothing was ever found. That stretch of ocean already had a reputation. In the years that followed, it would be given a name known all over the world: the Bermuda Triangle. For decades, this part of the Western Atlantic has been described as a place where the ordinary rules break down, where ships and aircraft vanish without warning, where compasses spin, where wreckage is never recovered, and where no explanation ever quite fits. Books, films, and television turned it into one of the greatest mysteries on Earth. By the height of its fame, the name alone was enough to say that something had been lost in the Bermuda Triangle was to say it had passed beyond the reach of explanation entirely. But when the records behind those disappearances are examined closely, a different story emerges. In some ways, it is more ordinary than the legend, and in some ways, it is stranger. The first thing to understand about the Bermuda Triangle is that it has no official borders. It appears on no nautical chart. No government agency recognizes it as a distinct region of the sea. The shape most people picture is a rough triangle drawn between 3 points: the tip of Florida, the island of Bermuda, and the islands of Puerto Rico, enclosing a vast stretch of the Western Atlantic, something on the order of 500,000 square miles of open ocean. But even that outline changes from one storyteller to the next. Some draw it larger, some draw it smaller. The truth is that the Bermuda Triangle is less a place than an idea laid over a very large and very busy piece of sea. And the idea itself is surprisingly recent. For centuries, ships had been lost in these waters, as they were lost everywhere. But it was not until the mid-1960s that a writer first gathered a handful of those losses into a single magazine article and gave the region its now famous name. A few years later, in 1974, a best-selling book carried the idea around the world, collecting story after story of vanished ships and aircraft, and presenting them as one unexplained pattern. Films followed, so did television. Within a decade, the Bermuda Triangle had become a household phrase and a fixture of the unexplained. The claims were dramatic and they were consistent. Vessels and planes disappeared here more often than anywhere else. They left no wreckage, no bodies, no distress calls. Instruments failed for no reason. Something about this particular triangle of ocean, the story went, was actively hostile to those who crossed it. Those claims rest almost entirely on a series of real disappearances, and the most famous of them are worth examining one at a time because they are where the legend was built. The oldest of the great cases had nothing to do with aircraft. In March of 1918, a large United States Navy ship called the Cyclops was steaming north through these waters, carrying a heavy cargo of ore and more than 300 people aboard. She was a coal ship, enormous and slow, making her way from the Caribbean toward the American coast. She sent no distress signal. She simply never arrived. No wreckage was ever found. No survivors. No trace of the more than 300 men aboard. To this day, the loss of the Cyclops remains the single largest loss of life in the history of the United States Navy, not caused by combat. And because it happened in these waters, and because it was never explained, it became one of the cornerstones of the legend. But there is a detail that rarely survives into the popular story. The Cyclops had 2 sister ships built to the same design, and years later, both of those sister ships also disappeared in the Atlantic, each carrying the same kind of heavy ore cargo. 3 nearly identical vessels, all lost the same way, all carrying the same dense load. To investigators, that did not point to anything mysterious. It pointed to a weakness in the ships themselves. Then there is the case that started it all. The disappearance of those 5 torpedo bombers in 1945, remembered ever since as Flight 19, is the true heart of the Bermuda Triangle story. It was dramatic, it was well documented, and the loss of the search plane on the same night only deepened it. For years it was told as proof that something impossible had happened. But the records of that flight tell a far more human story. The flight leader was an experienced combat pilot, but he was not deeply familiar with these particular waters. At some point, he became convinced that his compass had failed, and that the islands beneath him were the Florida Keys, which would mean he needed to fly northeast to get home. In reality, he was almost certainly over the Bahamas, well to the east, and flying northeast only carried the planes farther out to sea. The weather worsened through the afternoon. Radio contact was poor. By the time anyone on the ground understood how lost the flight had become, it was too late, and the aircraft were running low on fuel over open, darkening ocean. It was a tragedy of disorientation and bad weather, the kind that has killed pilots the world over. Aircraft feature heavily in the legend. In the late 1940s, 2 British passenger airliners were lost near Bermuda within about a year of each other, each vanishing on a long flight over open water, with everyone aboard and neither ever found. Around the same time, a passenger plane flying from Puerto Rico toward Florida disappeared almost within reach of its destination, with more than 30 people on board and no distress call. In the 1960s, a tanker went down in the same general region, carrying a molten cargo that made the ship notoriously unstable, taking her entire crew with her. Some cases were smaller, and somehow more haunting for it. On one occasion, the captain of a cabin cruiser radioed the Coast Guard from just off the coast of Florida. He was not in a panic. He reported only that his boat had struck something and lost power, and asked for a tow. He and his single passenger were unhurt and close enough to shore that they could see the lights of the city. A rescue vessel set out at once, reaching the position within about 20 minutes. There was nothing there. No boat, no wreckage. No sign of the 2 men then or ever. A calm voice on the radio, in sight of land, and then silence. Some of the tales are far older and stranger still. One that has been retold for well over a century describes a sailing ship that came upon an abandoned vessel drifting crewless at sea, put some of her own men aboard to sail it home, and then lost that second crew as well. When the 2 ships were separated in a squall, a ghost ship that supposedly claimed one crew after another. It is a chilling story. It is also one that later investigators struggled to trace to any solid record at all. Every one of the genuine losses was frightening, and every one, the proven and the possibly invented alike, was folded into the same growing story of a triangle that swallowed ships and planes whole. For nearly 30 years, that story went largely unchallenged. Then one researcher decided to go back to the original records. In the mid-1970s, at the very height of the Bermuda Triangle's fame, a librarian and researcher set out to do something no one had bothered to do. Rather than repeat the popular accounts, he went back to the primary sources, the newspaper reports from the time, the official investigations, the weather records, the insurance filings. What he found dismantled much of the legend. Case after case, he discovered that the popular versions had left out crucial facts. Ships said to have vanished in calm, clear weather had actually gone down in violent storms. Losses described as happening inside the triangle had in fact occurred hundreds or even thousands of miles away in entirely different oceans. Some disappearances presented as unsolved had already been explained at the time they happened, and in a few cases, vessels reported as mysteriously lost turned out never to have existed as described, or had been found, or had sunk for reasons that were perfectly well understood. The pattern was clear. The mystery had been manufactured not through outright invention, but through repetition. Each writer had borrowed from the last, quietly dropping the inconvenient details and sharpening the drama until a collection of ordinary maritime and aviation accidents had been transformed into something that looked supernatural. A single example shows how the trick worked. A famous disappearance might be described in one book as a ship that vanished on a calm, cloudless day, leaving investigators baffled. Trace it back to the newspapers of the time, and the same ship turns out to have gone down in a howling gale that had already claimed other vessels nearby. A loss no one at the time found mysterious in the slightest. Told the first way, it is a riddle. Told accurately, it is simply a shipwreck. The Bermuda Triangle was full of stories that changed their nature completely the moment the missing weather report was added back in. Strip away the exaggeration, and a single question remained. Do ships and planes really disappear in the Bermuda Triangle more often than anywhere else? Answering that means looking at what these waters are actually like. Because the Bermuda Triangle is not a gentle stretch of ocean. It has genuine dangers. They are simply natural ones. The first is the Gulf Stream. This warm, powerful current sweeps up through the region at speed, and it does something that matters enormously to the legend. It moves fast enough to carry wreckage far from where a ship or plane went down, and to do it quickly. A vessel lost in the Gulf Stream can have its debris scattered and swept away within hours. By the time searchers reach the last known position, there may be nothing left to find. The absence of wreckage so often described as eerie is exactly what one would expect in a current this strong. The second is the weather. These are tropical and subtropical waters, and they can turn with startling speed. Clear skies can give way to violent, localized storms in a matter of minutes. Waterspouts, tornadoes over water form here. Sudden squalls can overwhelm a small boat or disorient a pilot before there is time to send a call for help. And much of the region lies in the path of Atlantic hurricanes, where powerful currents and sudden storms meet the sea, can also throw up rogue waves, single walls of water, far larger than anything around them, capable of overwhelming a vessel in seconds, and leaving no time to react. And for aircraft, those same storms hide a danger of their own, sudden violent downdrafts of air that can drive a plane toward the ocean faster than a pilot can pull out of it. A small aircraft caught in the wrong cloud, far from land, and low on options may never get a second chance. The third is the depth. At the edge of the region lies one of the deepest places in the entire Atlantic Ocean, a trench plunging more than 5 miles straight down. A ship or an aircraft that sinks into water like that is for all practical purposes gone forever. There is no wreck to locate. There is no debris on the bottom that anyone will ever see. Other explanations have been offered over the years, some more seriously than others. There is a theory that enormous releases of gas from deposits beneath the seabed could reduce the density of the water, enough to sink a ship, without warning an idea that is scientifically interesting, but has never been shown to have caused a single loss here. There is the old claim that compasses behave strangely in the triangle. It is true that a line runs through this part of the world, where a compass points to true north and magnetic north, at once requiring no correction. But that is a known ordinary feature of navigation, not a malfunction, and it has never been a credible cause of disaster. And then there is the simplest explanation of all. This region is one of the most heavily traveled stretches of ocean and air on the entire planet. Between Florida, the Caribbean, and the wider Atlantic, an enormous volume of traffic passes through these waters every single day. Cargo ships, cruise liners, fishing boats, countless private yachts and small aircraft, many of them operated by people with far less training than a commercial crew crossing long stretches of open water, where a single mistake can be fatal. And a great many of the losses fall into that last group. For every Navy warship or airliner in the famous stories, there are dozens of small boats and light aircraft that were never built for the open Atlantic in the first place, pushed too far from shore, caught by weather they could not handle or lost, by crews who had never been trained to navigate across featureless water with no landmarks at all. These are the accidents that fill the records of every busy coastline on Earth. They are only remembered differently here. When a region carries that much traffic, it will inevitably record more accidents than an empty one, not because it is cursed, but because there is simply more that can go wrong. And when the numbers are actually examined, that is precisely what they show. The organizations with the most reason to know the truth have been consistent on this point for decades. The United States Coast Guard does not recognize the Bermuda Triangle as a specially dangerous area, and attributes the losses there to environmental conditions and human error exactly as it does for losses anywhere else. The insurers of the world's shipping have reportedly found no reason to charge higher premiums for vessels crossing the region, because the risk is not measurably greater. And scientific agencies have stated plainly that there is no evidence disappearances occur there, any more often than in other busy, heavily traveled parts of the ocean. By the cold measure of statistics, the Bermuda Triangle is not unusually deadly at all. Ships and planes are lost here because a great many ships and planes pass through here, across waters with fast currents, sudden storms, and some of the deepest water on Earth, which leaves one final question. the only real mystery left. If the Bermuda Triangle is not truly more dangerous than any other well-traveled sea, then why does the legend refuse to die? That is the part no current can explain. The idea took hold because it answered something people wanted answered. A disappearance with no witnesses and no wreckage is deeply unsettling. The mind resists the thought that a ship full of people, or a formation of aircraft, could simply cease to exist for a reason, as ordinary as a wrong turn in bad weather. A mysterious triangle, a hostile patch of sea, an unseen force in a strange way, these are almost more comforting than the truth. They give a random meaningless loss a shape and a cause. There is something else at work too. A good mystery is simply more compelling than a correct explanation. Lost in a storm off course out of fuel closes a story. Vanished and no one knows why keeps it open forever. And an open story is the kind that gets retold, embellished, and passed on. Each retelling made the triangle a little more dangerous than the records could justify and a little harder to forget. The legend did not survive despite being frightening. It survived because it was frightening, and because no amount of evidence has ever been as satisfying as the fear. And so, decades after the records were examined and the cases explained, the legend endures. It lives on in documentaries and books, and in the name itself, which still carries a faint chill whenever it is spoken. The waters between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico remain to millions of people a place where the impossible happens. The real ocean there is indifferent to all of it. It is warm and fast and deep and crossed every single day by thousands of vessels that arrive exactly where they meant to go. Now and then, as on any busy stretch of sea, one of them is not taken by a storm or a mistake or the swift current that carries the evidence away before anyone can find it. The Bermuda Triangle never needed a mystery. The sea has always been dangerous enough on its own. The only thing it ever truly swallowed without a trace was the ordinary explanation. More of the world's deadliest waters and the ships they kept in the films that follow. The next lies at the very bottom of South America, a narrow, twisting passage of freezing channels and sudden winds that sailors feared long before anyone dared the open sea beyond it. The Strait of Magellan.